The studio doors swung open mid-chorus, and two uniformed LAPD officers walked straight down the center aisle toward the stage, while three cameras kept rolling and 18 million people watched from their living rooms across America. Wait, because what happened in the next 4 minutes didn't just stop a television special. It exposed a secret that could have destroyed Elvis Presley's career and forced Dean Martin to make the hardest choice of his life on live national television. The NBC studio was hot under the lights. That particular kind of heat that came from dozens of stage lights burning at full power. Each one focused on making everything look perfect. The air shimmered above the lights. 200 audience members were packed into seats, designed for comfort but not ventilation, their faces already showing that glazed look people got when they'd been sitting too long watching something that was supposed to be spontaneous but was carefully choreographed. Dean Martin stood stage left in his tuxedo, perfectly pressed as always, his tie just loose enough to look effortless, singing harmony while Elvis worked the crowd with that voice that could make concrete crack and hearts stop. They were 40 seconds into That's Amore when the doors opened, and Dean saw them first because he was facing that direction, because his eyes had always been good at spotting trouble before it arrived at your table. Two cops, not security guards, not studio personnel in uniform, real LAPD officers, with real badges and real guns on their hips, walking with that particular stride that said they weren't here to ask questions. They were here to deliver answers whether you wanted them or not. The audience noticed second, heads turning like dominoes falling, whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. But Elvis kept singing because he hadn't seen them yet, because his back was to the doors, and he was too focused on hitting the high note to notice that the room's temperature had just dropped 20 degrees. Dean's voice faltered, just for a half second, and that's when Elvis turned to look at him, following Dean's gaze, and saw the two officers now halfway down the aisle. Elvis's face went from showman's smile to pure terror in the space of one heartbeat. His voice died mid-word. The band kept playing for maybe 3 more beats before the conductor noticed something was wrong and started signaling them to stop. Instruments trailing off one by one until the only sound in the studio was the shuffle of 200 people shifting in their seats and the soft electrical hum of cameras that were still recording every second of this. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? The taller officer reached the base of the stage, put one hand on the edge, and spoke loud enough for the front rows to hear but quiet enough that it felt like a private conversation happening in front of a crowd. Mr. Presley, we need to speak with you. Now please. Dean moved without thinking, stepping between Elvis and the officers, with the same smooth motion he used for stage choreography, making it look intentional, making it look like part of the show even though his heart was hammering against his ribs hard enough to crack bone. Officers, I'm sure whatever this is about can wait until after we finish the... It can't wait, Mr. Martin. The second officer, shorter, but with eyes that had seen things that made him old before his time, stepped forward. This is official police business. We need Mr. Presley to come with us. Look at what's happening here. Because this isn't just two cops doing their job. The studio audience was dead silent now. The kind of silence that felt like pressure building in your ears before an explosion. The kind of silence that made you aware of your own heartbeat and breathing. Dean could see the director in the control booth through the glass, making frantic hand signals to someone off camera, his face red, his mouth moving in what were probably curse words, probably trying to figure out if they should cut to commercial or keep rolling. If this was a disaster, they needed to hide from the viewing public, or a moment they were obligated to document for posterity. The red lights on top of the cameras stayed on, unblinking electronic eyes. They were still live. 18 million people were watching this happen in real time. Families gathered around television sets in living rooms from New York to California. Elvis's hands were shaking so badly, he had to let go of the microphone to hide it. And Dean saw something in the kid's eyes he'd never seen before. Not in all the years they'd known each other. not in all the shows and parties and late-night conversations. He saw guilt, not the vague kind of guilt that came from forgetting someone's birthday or showing up late to rehearsal. The specific, crushing kind of guilt that said, I did something, and now they've come for me, and I deserve whatever happens next. Notice something about this moment. The cameras were still rolling. The director hadn't cut away. Every second of this was being broadcast into homes across the country, into living rooms where families were gathered around television sets, expecting to see two legends perform, and instead were watching what looked like an arrest happening in real time. This wasn't just a crisis. This was a public execution, and the executioners were letting everyone watch. Dean made a decision. Not a smart decision, not a calculated decision, just the only decision he could live with. He turned to the cameras, to those red lights that represented millions of eyes, and he smiled, not his stage smile, his real smile, the one that said, I know this looks bad, but trust me for just one more minute. Then he turned back to the officers and said, whatever you need to discuss with Elvis, you can discuss it right here, right now, with me standing next to him. We're not going anywhere until you tell us what this is about. The taller officer's jaw tightened. Mr. Martin, this doesn't concern you. Everything that happens to him on this stage concerns me. So start talking, or we're all going to stand here in silence until you do. And I promise you that's going to make for very boring television. The audience wasn't sure if they should laugh. A few nervous chuckles escaped, died quickly, got swallowed up by the tension that filled the room like smoke. The shorter officer looked at his partner, some unspoken communication passing between them, then looked up at Dean with something that might have been respect, or might have been irritation. There was an incident 3 hours ago, a hit-and-run accident on Sunset Boulevard, white Cadillac, same make and model as the one registered to Mr. Presley, left the scene. Witness got a partial plate that matches. We need him to come down to the station and answer some questions. The words hit Dean like a physical blow, but he kept his face neutral, kept his voice steady. Hit and run. The kind of charge that could end a career, that could turn a beloved star into a pariah overnight, that could put someone in prison if the victim died or was seriously injured. He looked at Elvis and saw the kid's face had gone from pale to gray, saw his lips moving, but no sound coming out, saw him swaying slightly, like he might pass out right there on stage. Listen, because this is where you need to understand what was actually at stake. Elvis Presley, in 1965, wasn't just a singer. He was an industry, a brand, a cultural phenomenon, worth millions of dollars and thousands of jobs. If he went down, he didn't go down alone. His manager, Colonel Parker, his band, his backup singers, the studio executives who'd banked everything on his continued success, the television networks that paid premium rates for his appearances, all of it would collapse like a house of cards if the foundation crumbled. And right now, on live television, that foundation was starting to crack. Dean turned back to the officers, his mind racing through options, through consequences, through every possible way this could end. Was anyone hurt? The taller officer hesitated, and in that hesitation, Dean heard the answer. The victim is in critical condition at Cedars-Sinai. Compound fractures, internal bleeding, possible traumatic brain injury. The doctors say the next few hours will determine if they make it. Someone in the audience gasped. The cameras kept rolling. Dean felt like he was standing on a cliff edge in a windstorm, one wrong step away from a fall that would kill everyone he cared about. He looked at Elvis again and saw the kid's lips forming words that Dean could read even without sound. I didn't do it. Notice what's happening in this split second. 3 words, mouthed, not spoken, but Dean heard them as clearly as if Elvis had shouted them. The question was whether Dean believed them, whether he was willing to bet his own reputation and career on trusting that the terror in Elvis's eyes was from being falsely accused and not from being caught. He had maybe 5 seconds to decide. The whole country was watching. The director was probably screaming into someone's headset to cut to commercial, but nobody was listening because this was the kind of television you couldn't look away from, the kind of moment that would be talked about for years whether it ended well or catastrophically. Dean made his second decision of the night. Officers, I understand you have a job to do, and I respect that, but I was with Elvis 3 hours ago. We were in rehearsal for this show, right here in this studio, and he never left. There were 40 witnesses, the band, the crew, the producers. His car might look like the one involved in the accident, but he wasn't driving it, because he was here, with me. The lie came out smooth as silk, delivered with the same easy confidence Dean used for punchlines. And the beautiful thing about a good lie was that once you committed to it, once you said it out loud in front of 18 million witnesses, you couldn't take it back. You either wrote it all the way to the end, or you crashed and burned. And Dean had never been the crashing and burning type. Elvis stared at Dean like he'd just watched someone jump in front of a train to push him out of the way. The shorter officer's eyes narrowed. You're saying you can account for Mr. Presley's whereabouts for the entire afternoon? Every minute. We were rehearsing from 1 p.m. until we went live at 7. Ask anyone here. Ask the director. Ask the sound engineer. Ask the kid who brings us coffee. Elvis didn't leave this building. Remember this moment, because it's the moment when Dean Martin stopped being just a performer and became an accomplice, when he crossed a line that you couldn't uncross, when he committed to a story that would either save Elvis or destroy them both. The officers looked at each other again, that same silent communication, and Dean could see them doing the math, weighing the certainty of a partial license plate against the word of 2 of the biggest stars in America, against the logistical nightmare of arresting someone on live television, against the fact that if they were wrong, if Dean's story held up, they'd be the ones who looked like fools in front of the entire country. The taller officer spoke slowly, carefully, like he was walking through a minefield. We'll need to verify that with the studio staff, and we'll need Mr. Presley to come down to the station voluntarily to provide a formal statement and allow us to examine his vehicle. He'll be there first thing tomorrow morning, Dean said, with his lawyer. Is that acceptable? Another pause. Another exchange of looks. Then the shorter officer nodded, just barely, and both of them stepped back from the stage. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., Hollywood Division. If he doesn't show, we'll come find him, and we won't be as polite next time. Look at what Dean had just done. They turned and walked back up the aisle, and the studio stayed silent until the doors closed behind them. And then the silence broke like a dam bursting, audience members erupting into confused chatter, the director finally finding his voice and screaming, "Cut to commercial," through every speaker in the building, the red lights on the cameras finally going dark as the feed switched to a pre-recorded advertisement for laundry detergent that felt obscene in its cheerful banality. Dean grabbed Elvis by the arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks, and pulled him toward the side exit before anyone could stop them, before the reporters who were definitely already calling their editors could get to them, before the moment crystallized into something permanent and unchangeable. They made it to Elvis's dressing room, and Dean slammed the door, locked it, turned to face Elvis, who was leaning against the wall like he'd just finished a marathon. "Did you do it?" Dean's voice was quiet, dangerous, stripped of all the charm and smoothness that made audiences love him. Nothing like the smooth crooner the audience knew. This was the voice he saved for moments when lives were on the line and lies weren't acceptable. "No." Elvis's voice broke on the word, cracked right down the middle like glass under pressure. "I swear to God, Dean, I didn't. I haven't driven that car in 2 days. I've been letting my cousin use it because his car's in the shop. Some transmission problem he couldn't afford to fix. And I thought I was doing him a favor. But if I tell the cops that, they'll go after him. And he's got warrants, old stuff from Memphis that he never dealt with. bar fights and unpaid fines, and stupid mistakes from when he was younger and dumber. If they arrest him for this, if they run his name through the system, they'll send him back to Tennessee, and he'll do time for the warrants even if he didn't cause the accident, even if the hit and run turns out to be someone else entirely. Stop for a second and understand what Dean was hearing. Not a confession, not a denial of responsibility, a web of complications, a family obligation, a choice between protecting someone you loved and protecting yourself. And Elvis had already made his choice before the cops showed up. He was going to take the fall for his cousin rather than give up the name, was going to let his own career burn rather than send family to prison. It was noble and stupid in equal measure, the kind of decision that destroyed good people every day. Dean paced the small room, his mind working through scenarios faster than he could fully process them. Where's your cousin now? I don't know. He was supposed to bring the car back this morning, but he never showed. I've been calling his motel, but no answer. Elvis's hands were shaking again, worse than before. What did you do, Dean? Why did you lie for me? Because you're a goddamn idiot. And someone needs to save you from yourself. Dean stopped pacing, looked Elvis in the eye. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call every single person who was in this studio this afternoon. You're going to make sure they all remember that you were here, that you never left, that anyone who says otherwise is confused or lying. Then you're going to find your cousin, and you're going to get the truth out of him, and you're going to figure out if he actually caused that accident, or if this is a case of mistaken identity. And tomorrow morning, at 8 a.m., you're going to walk into that police station with the most expensive lawyer money can buy, and you're going to tell them exactly what I told them. You were here, you have witnesses, and your car was being used by someone else without your explicit permission. That's still lying. That's survival. That's the difference between going to prison and walking free. That's choosing your career over your cousin's mistakes. Dean grabbed Elvis by the shoulders, forced him to look up. I stuck my neck out for you tonight. I lied to cops on national television. If this goes bad, it doesn't just hurt you, it hurts me. It hurts everyone who works with us. It hurts every person whose job depends on us staying successful and scandal-free. So you're going to make this right, or I swear to God I will personally tell those officers that I was mistaken about the timeline. Elvis nodded, but his face said he wasn't sure he could do what Dean was asking. Wasn't sure he could throw his cousin under the bus even to save himself. Dean saw that hesitation and felt something cold settle in his stomach. The realization that he'd just bet everything on a hand he couldn't control, that Elvis's sense of family loyalty might be stronger than his sense of self-preservation. The knock on the door made them both jump. A voice called through. Mr. Martin? Mr. Presley, the director needs to see you both immediately. Notice how fast the machine started moving. The next 3 hours were a blur of meetings and phone calls and carefully worded statements. The studio's legal team materialized like they'd been waiting in the wings, which they probably had been, and they started doing damage control before the entertainment reporters could even file their first stories. The director was furious, talking about breach of contract and insurance liabilities, but Dean shut him down with a look that said, "You got the best television moment of your career and you're complaining about it." The sponsors were nervous but intrigued. Controversy sold products as well as wholesome entertainment did, sometimes better. By midnight the story was everywhere. Every radio station, every late-night news broadcast, every reporter who could get near a telephone was talking about the moment police walked onto a live television set to question Elvis Presley about a hit and run. The studio switchboard was jammed with calls from fans demanding to know if Elvis was okay, from other reporters wanting confirmation, from lawyers offering their services, from publicity-hungry celebrities claiming they'd been in the studio and could vouch for Elvis's presence even though half of them had never set foot in the building. Dean sat in his hotel room, with a drink that was mostly ice by now, watching the late news replay footage of the moment over and over, watching himself step between Elvis and the cops, watching himself lie with a smile on his face. His phone rang every 30 seconds, but he didn't answer. He just sat there, wondering if he'd done the right thing, wondering if Elvis would actually show up at the police station tomorrow, wondering what happened to the person who'd been hit by that car, and whether they'd survive the night. The phone rang again. This time Dean answered, his voice rough from cigarettes and stress. "And too many hours awake. It's me." Elvis's voice was rough, like he'd been crying, like he'd been screaming into a pillow, trying to make sense of what was happening. "I found my cousin. Took me 6 hours, and every connection I had in this city, but I found him holed up in a motel in Pasadena, drinking himself into oblivion. He admitted he caused the accident, ran a red light because he was late, wasn't paying attention, hit the woman when she stepped into the crosswalk with her groceries, panicked when he realized what he'd done, panicked when he saw her on the ground not moving, drove off because he was scared about the warrants, scared about what would happen if the cops showed up and started asking questions." The victim was a woman crossing the street with groceries, 53 years old, mother of 2. She's still in critical condition. They don't know if she'll make it through the night. Dean closed his eyes. "Where's your cousin now?" "Gone. Took off as soon as he told me. Said he was heading to Mexico. Said he'd rather run than turn himself in." Elvis's voice cracked. "Dean, I can't do this. I can't let some woman die and pretend I don't know who's responsible. I can't let you get dragged down with me. I'm going to tell the truth tomorrow." "No, you're not. Dean, listen to me very carefully. Your cousin is gone. You turning yourself in won't bring him back or make him face justice. All it will do is destroy your career and make me look like a liar, which will destroy my career, and then both of us are finished for nothing. The woman who got hit deserves justice, but she's not going to get it from you confessing to something you didn't do." Dean took a breath, steadied himself. "Here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to set up a trust fund, anonymous, enough money to cover all her medical bills, rehabilitation, lost wages, everything. You're going to make sure she's taken care of for the rest of her life. And you're going to pray that's enough to balance the scales. That's not justice. No, it's not. But it's all you can do without destroying everyone who depends on you. Sometimes there are no good choices, kid. Sometimes you just pick the least bad option and live with it." The line went quiet for a long time. Dean could hear Elvis breathing, could hear him trying to decide if he could live with himself after making this choice. Finally, "Okay, I'll do it. But Dean, if she dies..." "If she dies, we'll figure it out then. One crisis at a time." They hung up. Dean sat in the dark and finished his drink and thought about all the compromises a person made to stay successful, all the corners you cut and lines you crossed and deals you made with yourself about what was acceptable and what wasn't. He thought about the woman in the hospital who might not wake up, who'd been hit by a car driven by a coward, who'd run rather than face consequences. He thought about Elvis, who was a good kid, caught between loyalty and responsibility, and he thought about himself, about the lie he'd told on national television, about whether he'd still be able to look at himself in the mirror tomorrow. Wait for what happened next, because the way this resolved itself wasn't clean or simple or anything close to justice. The morning news said the woman had stabilized during the night, that doctors were cautiously optimistic about her recovery. Elvis showed up at the Hollywood police station at exactly 8 a.m. with a lawyer who charged more per hour than most people made in a month. The story Dean had told held up because the studio staff backed it, because the timeline worked, because Elvis's Cadillac, when examined, showed no damage consistent with hitting a pedestrian. The cops weren't happy about it, but they didn't have enough evidence to pursue charges. The case went cold after 2 weeks when they couldn't find the actual driver. The woman recovered, slowly with complications. But she lived. An anonymous trust fund appeared that covered every expense, and then some. The entertainment reporters moved on to the next scandal. The television special aired the following week, with a disclaimer about unexpected interruption by local authorities, and got the highest ratings NBC had seen in 5 years. Remember what this cost? Even though it looked like everyone walked away clean, Dean and Elvis never talked about that night again. Not directly, but it hung between them like smoke, visible if you knew to look for it. Every time they shared a stage after that, Dean would catch Elvis's eye at some point during the show, and there'd be a moment of understanding, of shared weight, of knowing they'd both made choices they'd have to carry for the rest of their lives. Later, much later, when Dean was alone in his suite, overlooking the Vegas Strip, he'd pour himself a drink and think about truth and lies and the space between them where most people actually lived. He'd think about the woman who'd been hit, about whether the money was enough, whether anything could compensate for pain and trauma and months of recovery. He'd think about Elvis's cousin somewhere in Mexico, living with guilt that should have landed him in prison, and he'd think about his own choice to step between Elvis and those cops, to commit to a lie before he even knew if it was justified, to protect someone he cared about, even if it meant compromising everything he claimed to believe in. He would make the same choice again. He knew he would, because that's what you did for people you loved. You stood between them and the consequences, even when they deserved those consequences, even when standing there meant getting hit yourself. You took the fall, or you took the lie, and you lived with whatever came after, and you hoped it was enough. If you want to hear about the night someone else came, looking for Dean with questions he couldn't answer and choices he couldn't avoid, tell me in the comments, and I'll take you back to when the stakes were even higher and the lies even more dangerous. Now,